टंग के बंद है बहुत मनो थे नाटकन के बातें तो पिक्चर में नीचे है बीचों में जो बेचेरे मुझे चेचेरे हमारी तरफ पीले.
Every whisper, every smirk, every insult. He heard it all but said nothing. To them, he was just a cleaner, someone who didn't belong in a room filled with power, law, and pride. But they didn't know. This man once taught someone how to hold a pen, how to dream beyond broken walls, and when the doors opened, and the judge stepped in, the laughter stopped. Because the judge froze. His hand shook. The gavel slipped from his fingers and hit the floor. Everyone stared. Why was the most powerful man in the room trembling at the sight of a janitor? Who was this man, and what secret bound them together? In the next few seconds, that answer would turn the entire courtroom upside down. Before the laughter, before the gavel dropped in shock, there was only silence. And in that silence, every night, a man named Mr. James swept away the world's footprints. One corridor, one courtroom, one forgotten dream at a time. They called him the Cleaner. Not because he loved the title, but because no one cared to ask his name. He moved like a ghost between marble floors and echoing walls, his broom catching whispers of other people's lives. Every night he watched the rich walk past him, shoes polished, heads high, and every morning he left before the sun rose, so no one would see the tears in his eyes. To them, he was invisible. But to himself, he was still a father holding on to a promise he once made, to a boy with a smile brighter than morning light. That boy used to wait by the window. "Papa, when I grow up, I'll buy you a big house so you'll never have to work again." And James would laugh, tired but proud. He'd touch the boy's head and say, "Don't worry, son. Just become someone good. That's all I ask." But life doesn't always keep its promises. One winter night, everything changed. James lost his job. The bills piled higher than the hope he had left. His wife fell sick, and the little boy he adored had to leave for school miles away. A scholarship, a dream, and a goodbye that felt too long. Years passed. The boy grew. The man aged. Letters stopped coming. Phone calls went unanswered. And in the silence that followed, Mr. James kept working, not because he had to, but because work was the only thing that reminded him he was still alive. Every night, after mopping empty halls, he'd sit in the corner of his small, flickering apartment. A single light bulb hung above his head, swinging slowly, casting shadows over cracked walls filled with pictures of a boy in a graduation cap. The same boy whose smile once gave him purpose. He'd take out that photo, trace the edges of the boy's face, and whisper, "One day, you'll be proud of me, son." But no one heard those words. No one knew that behind that uniform, behind those tired eyes, was a man who once built dreams with his bare hands. Each morning, he'd walk into the courthouse, the very place where truth and justice were supposed to live, and yet, not a single person ever looked at him like he mattered. Lawyers brushed past him, dropping their files. Guards shouted, "Move faster, old man!" And still Mr. James smiled, bowed his head, and swept quietly, like the world's noise didn't reach him anymore. He cleaned the floors where powerful men argued about justice, but he never received any himself. He picked up the papers they threw, the coffee cups they dropped, the pride they left behind. But he never complained. He never asked for respect. He just kept working, because somewhere in the back of his heart, a voice still whispered, "Maybe one day he'll walk in here. Maybe my son will see me and I'll finally hear him say, 'I'm proud of you, Dad.'" But fate has a strange way of reuniting the broken. One morning, the courthouse buzzed with excitement. Reporters filled the hall. A new judge was being sworn in, young, brilliant, fair, and loved by all. Everyone spoke his name with admiration, calling him the judge with the heart of gold. And as Mr. James swept in the background, his tired hands paused. That name. It echoed in his chest like thunder. It couldn't be. He looked up at the banner on the wall, his eyes trembling, his breath frozen. The name written there was the name of the boy in the photo on his wall. His son. The world clapped for the new judge. Cameras flashed. Speeches began. And in that same room, just a few feet away, the father swept the dust off the marble floors, while the son stood beneath golden lights, unaware that the man who raised him was right there, still cleaning the footsteps of others, still whispering prayers that his son would live the life he never could. That night, Mr. James didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling of his tiny room, the echoes of the crowd still ringing in his ears. He thought of all the times he'd dreamed of this moment, meeting his son again, maybe hugging him, maybe hearing, "Dad, I made it." But he also knew something else. He wasn't proud of what he'd become. He was just a janitor now, in his son's courtroom. The next morning, as dawn broke over the city, he put on his uniform, freshly washed, carefully pressed, like it was armor for his soul. He walked into the courthouse, broom in hand, and stood in the corner of the courtroom, his heart pounding as his son, now Judge Alexander James, took his seat on the bench. The gavel struck once. "Court is in session!" The same hall that once ignored him now held the very man he'd raised to be strong and still. No one looked at Mr. James. No one knew that the man cleaning the dust was the same man who had once held that judge in his arms, teaching him how to walk, how to pray, how to dream. But fate wasn't done with them yet. Not today, not this courtroom. Because before this day was over, the laughter, the arrogance, the blindness of the crowd would all turn into stunned silence. And for the first time in his life, Mr. James wouldn't be invisible anymore. The courtroom was alive with noise, shuffling papers, murmuring voices, and the sharp echo of polished shoes across marble floors. But to Mr. James it was all distant. Just another day, another room to clean, another set of footsteps to erase. He swept quietly near the front, careful not to disturb anyone. Every movement was slow, deliberate, respectful, the way a man moves when he's been invisible for too long. He kept his head low, eyes on the floor, as voices rose and faded around him. Then a voice echoed through the hall, firm, calm, commanding. "Court is now in session." That voice, it froze him mid-sweep. He'd heard it before, not in a courtroom, but in a small kitchen years ago where laughter used to live. It was deeper now, stronger. But the rhythm, the warmth underneath the authority, it was the same. He dared to lift his eyes. And there he was. The new judge walked in, tall, confident, draped in a robe that carried the weight of justice. Every step he took echoed with pride. Reporters leaned in, lawyers straightened their ties. They whispered about his achievements. The youngest judge in the district, a man of integrity, a symbol of hope. But Mr. James didn't hear any of that. His world had gone still. All he could see was that face, older, sharper, but painfully familiar. The same jawline, the same gentle eyes that once looked up to him as a child and said, "Papa, when I grow up, I'll make you proud." And now, those eyes didn't see him. He took a shaky breath, lowered his head again, and kept sweeping. But the broom trembled in his hands. His heart was pounding so loud it drowned out the judge's opening words. For a brief second, the man he was, the father, the dreamer, returned inside him. Memories flooded in. He saw the little boy again, sitting cross-legged on the floor of their old home, pretending to bang a gavel, shouting, "Order in the court!" He'd laughed back then, touseling the boy's hair, saying, "One day, maybe you will." And now, that day had come. But not like this. The judge adjusted his robe, eyes focused on the case before him. He didn't glance toward the corner where his father stood. Did he not recognize him? Or was he pretending not to? The doubt tore at Mr. James's heart. He wanted to speak, to call his name, to whisper, "Son, it's me." But the voice caught in his throat, smothered by years of silence and shame. He bent down again, brushing the dust near the judge's bench. A paper slipped from the desk, sliding slowly to the floor. Instinctively, Mr. James reached for it. His old hands, calloused, trembling, lifted the page and placed it on the table. And then it happened. Their eyes met, only for a second. But time stopped. The judge froze mid-sentence. The pen in his hand slipped slightly, and Mr. James's breath caught in his chest. Those were the same eyes, his son's eyes. He knew them anywhere. Eyes that once looked at him with admiration, eyes that used to shine when he said goodnight stories, eyes that once filled with tears the day they were forced apart. But now, those same eyes looked away. The judge blinked, his expression unreadable, maybe surprise, maybe denial. He cleared his throat, turned back to the case file, and said softly, "Thank you, sir. You can continue cleaning, sir. Not Dad, not even James. Just, sir." The word cut deeper than a knife. Mr. James lowered his gaze, whispering under his breath, "Yes, Your Honor." He stepped back, his chest heavy, but his pride still quiet and steady. He'd waited years for this moment, dreamed of being seen. But not like this. Not as a stranger, not as a shadow in his own son's world. He moved toward the corner again, sweeping slowly, each stroke of the broom now echoing like a heartbeat, steady. Pained, trying not to break, the judge tried to focus, reading through the documents in front of him, but his mind was slipping somewhere else. He could feel something in that man's presence, something painfully familiar. The shape of his shoulders, the calm in his movements, the quiet humility. A memory flashed, a cold night, a small hand wrapped in a larger one. A voice whispering, "Don't be afraid, son. You're going to do great things." He blinked rapidly, pushing the memory away. No, it couldn't be. His father was gone. Or so he'd told himself. For years, he'd buried the pain, the anger of being left behind, the resentment of growing up alone, the confusion of loving someone who couldn't stay. And now that same presence, that same quiet strength, was standing just a few feet away. He couldn't look again, because if he did, he might break. But fate didn't let him hide for long. As the hearing continued, Mr. James's broom accidentally knocked over a small glass of water from the edge of a table. The sound shattered the silence. Everyone turned. The clerk scolded him under her breath. Reporters whispered, "Why is the janitor even in here during session?" And the judge's head snapped up. Their eyes locked again, at longer this time. A flicker of confusion, recognition, pain. Mr. James's lips trembled. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Then quietly the judge spoke, his tone softer now. "What's your name, sir?" For the first time in years, the father lifted his head proudly. He swallowed, voice low but steady. "James, Mr. James, Your Honor." Silence. A strange, heavy silence. The name echoed in the judge's mind, not as a stranger's name, but as a memory he'd buried deep inside. Mr. James. Dad. Papa James. His chest tightened. His heart began to race. He looked closer, and this time he saw not a janitor, but the man who used to walk him to school, the man who gave up his food so his son could eat, the man whose hands once built his dreams brick by brick. He saw his father, but fear kept him silent. Because how do you face a man you've spent years pretending didn't exist? How do you say dad when your whole world has called him nobody? So he looked away, eyes glassy, voice trembling. He cleared his throat again and forced out words that didn't belong to his heart. "You may go now." And just like that, the wall between them stood tall again. Mr. James bowed slightly, turned, and walked away. But as he did, a single tear fell to the polished marble floor, a tear no one saw, except his son. The judge watched it drop, and something inside him cracked open. Because that tear carried everything words could never say. Regret, forgiveness, love, and a lifetime of silence. And though the courtroom went on as usual, nothing would ever be the same again. The man everyone ignored had finally been seen, and the son who looked away could no longer unsee what he had lost. The courtroom was cold, silent, the kind of silence that hums louder than noise. Mr. James stood in the corner, broom in hand, like a shadow no one noticed. He had learned to disappear in plain sight, to move quietly, to breathe softly, to let the world walk past him without ever turning their heads. He didn't expect respect anymore. Not gratitude, not even a kind glance. All he wanted was to finish his work and leave before the laughter began again. But that day, The laughter started sooner. As he bent to clean near the benches, a lawyer's voice cut through the air, sharp and cruel. "Hey, old man, move aside. You're in the way." Mr. James nodded gently, whispering, "Yes, sir." But the lawyer wasn't done. He smirked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Who let this janitor in here during a live session? This place is for professional, not for trash sweepers." The courtroom chuckled. A few whispered under their breath, "Man, can't they keep these people out while the judge is in session?" Each word hit like a stone, but Mr. James didn't flinch. He'd been hit harder, by life, by hunger, by loneliness. He simply lowered his head, his fingers tightening around the broom handle, his silence screaming louder than any defense could. The judge, his son, sat still. He'd heard every word. He'd tried to focus on the case, to keep the mask of authority firm. But with every insult, something inside him cracked. The sound of those cruel voices dragged him back through time, to the small, broken home where his father worked double shifts so he could have shoes for school. He remembered his father's hands, calloused, tired, yet always gentle. He remembered the nights when his dad would come home late, his uniform dirty from the streets, but he'd still smile and say, "How's my little man doing today?" And now, the same man, that same heart, was being humiliated right in front of him. He clenched his jaw, staring down at the papers on his desk, trying to keep control. But the sound of another laugh, a sharp, ugly one, snapped the last thread of his composure. The lawyer sneered again, "Get out of the courtroom, old man. You don't belong here." The words echoed, cruel, final, and in that moment the judge's pen fell from his hand. It hit the desk with a loud click. Everyone froze. He stood up, slowly, deliberately, his robe swaying with the weight of the moment. His voice, when it came, trembled, but not from fear. From fury, from pain, from love that had been buried for too long. "Don't you ever?" He paused, breathing heavily, his eyes locked on the lawyer, who now looked confused. "Don't you ever speak to him that way?" A hush spread through the courtroom. The laughter died instantly. The lawyer blinked, nervous, trying to recover. "Sir, I was only—" The judge's voice broke through again, louder this time. "Do you have any idea who that man is?" The lawyer shook his head, stumbling over his words. He's the janitor, sir." The judge's hand slammed against the desk, echoing like thunder. "No!" His voice cracked. "That man is my father!" Gasps filled the room. A reporter dropped his camera. The clerk covered her mouth. Even the guards froze mid-step. For a moment, no one moved. The world seemed to stop spinning. Mr. James's broom slipped from his trembling hands and clattered onto the marble floor. The sound rang through the courtroom like a bell that announced the death of pride and the birth of truth. He looked up slowly, eyes wide, shining with disbelief. His lips parted, but no words came out, only a soft breath, half prayer, half shock. The judge stepped down from the bench, each step heavy with years of silence, years of distance, years of unspoken love and guilt. His voice softened as he walked closer. "This man," he said, "worked every night of his life so I could stand here today. When others slept, he swept. When I cried, he carried me. And while the world ignored him, he never stopped believing in me." The reporters lowered their cameras. The clerk began to cry. The lawyer, pale and ashamed, lowered his head. The judge continued, his voice breaking with emotion. "You all call him just a cleaner. But to me, he's the reason I'm standing behind this desk. He's the reason I learned what justice means. Because while I studied law, he lived it. Quietly, humbly, every single day." Mr. James's knees weakened. He gripped the edge of a bench to steady himself, his vision blurring through tears. His son stood just a few feet away, not the boy who used to dream in their small home, but a man, strong, powerful, respected, now looking at him with pride and love. The judge's voice grew softer. "I told myself I'd never forget where I came from, but somewhere along the way, I forgot who I came from." He stepped closer, right up to his father. Everyone watched, breathless. No one spoke. Then, in a voice cracked by emotion, he whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad." and he wrapped his arms around him. For a second, Mr. James didn't move. He just stood there, was stunned, lost in disbelief. But then, slowly, his trembling hands rose and held his son tight. The boy he once carried on his shoulders, now holding him. The entire courtroom was silent. Reporters forgot to record. Even the guards turned away, blinking tears. In that silence, every cruel word spoken moments ago dissolved into nothing. The laughter died. The arrogance faded. And in its place, respect bloomed like light in a dark room, because in that single moment, everyone understood what real worth looks like. It's not in a robe or a gavel or a title. It's in the calloused hands of a father who worked in silence so his son could speak with power. The judge pulled back slightly, his eyes glistening. He whispered, "You'll never clean another courtroom again." Mr. James smiled faintly, his voice trembling. "Then let me just finish this one, son." And the judge shook his head, tears falling freely. "No, Dad, you've already cleaned enough, and not just these floors, but my heart." Gasps turned to quiet sobs. A few people clapped, not for the case, but for the courage of truth. Mr. James stood tall for the first time in years. He no longer looked like a janitor. He looked like what he had always been, a father, a hero, a man who had finally been seen. And as father and son stood together, the judge turned to the crowd and said quietly, "Respect is not earned by what you wear, but by what you've carried for the sake of someone else." And in that sacred stillness, a single truth filled the air, that sometimes the hands that sweep our floors are the same hands that once lifted us higher than we could ever reach. The courtroom stood frozen, not in order, not in law, but in awe. No one knew what to do. Reporters who had come looking for a story had found something deeper, a truth that cameras could never truly capture. The gavel sat silent. The walls that had echoed judgments for years now echoed only the sound of quiet tears. And in the middle of that heavy silence, a son, once lost in pride, held the man who gave him everything. Mr. James stood trembling in his son's arms. His uniform was still dirty, his shoes still worn, but at that moment, he looked like the richest man alive. The judge's voice softened, no longer the voice of authority, but the voice of a child finding his father again after a lifetime apart. "Dad, I forgot who I was because I forgot who you are." The room went still. You could hear hearts breaking and healing. All at once, Mr. James smiled faintly, his eyes glistening beneath the courtroom lights. His voice cracked like old wood, but every word carried the weight of years he had spent in silence. "You didn't forget me, son. You just needed time to remember." He placed a calloused hand on his son's cheek. "I always knew you'd make me proud. I just didn't know it would hurt this much to watch you do it." The judge closed his eyes, tears falling freely now, each one landing on the same hands that once held him steady when the world felt too heavy for a child to carry. He whispered, barely audible, "I thought I had to prove myself to the world. But the truth is, I just needed to say thank you to the one man who never stopped believing in me." Mr. James smiled again, the kind of smile that doesn't need words. He didn't say much. He never did. But his silence said it all. The bailiff, usually cold and stern, wiped his eyes discreetly. A journalist put down his camera. Even the lawyer who had mocked the old man lowered his head, ashamed, humbled, changed, because what everyone witnessed that day was not just an apology. It was a revelation. It was the unmasking of a truth the world keeps forgetting, that greatness doesn't begin in power. It begins in sacrifice. The judge turned toward the courtroom. His voice, still shaky, carried the kind of strength that only comes from truth. "This man you all ignored, this man you laughed at, taught me more about justice than any law book ever could. He taught me that true dignity doesn't wear a robe. It wears humility. And that real power isn't in commanding others. It's in how you carry yourself when no one's watching." A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. But no one clapped. No one dared to. It wasn't a moment for applause. It was a moment for reflection, because every person in that courtroom, from the lawyer to the clerk, from the bailiff to the journalist, saw themselves in that mirror of humility. They saw their own pride, their own blindness, and they felt it, deep, quiet, and heavy. The judge reached for his father's broom, the same broom they had all mocked moments earlier. He lifted it gently as if it were something sacred. Then, kneeling down, he whispered, "This broom built my life." Gasps. Silence. 1,000 unspoken apologies filled the air. He turned to his father and smiled. "You don't have to clean here anymore," Mr. James chuckled softly, his voice a whisper from a man who had spent his life serving without complaint. "Then let me just finish this one." "Son," the judge shook his head, laughing through his tears. "No, Dad. You've already done enough. More than I could ever repay." Mr. James looked around the room. The same faces that once looked down on him now looking at him with awe, with respect, with guilt, with admiration, and in that stillness, he said something that broke every heart in the room. "You see, son, people only laugh when they forget where they came from, and they stop laughing when they finally remember." The judge swallowed hard. Every muscle in his face fought to hold back another wave of emotion. He whispered, "You made me proud, Dad." Mr. James smiled, tears tracing lines across his wrinkled cheeks. "No, son. You made me proud." For the first time in his life, Mr. James wasn't invisible. The man who had been walked past, ignored, and laughed at for decades stood tall in a room full of people who finally saw him. Not as a cleaner, but as the foundation beneath a man they admired. The crowd slowly rose to their feet. Not out of duty, not out of habit, but out of respect. Every eye glistened, every heart ached, because they weren't standing for a janitor. They were standing for every parent, every worker, every silent soul who gave everything and asked for nothing. The judge turned, guiding his father toward the exit. But just before they reached the door, he looked back at the room one last time. His voice, now steady, calm, almost like a whisper of wind, carried words that would echo long after the day was over. Never look down on anyone, because you might be looking at the reason you stand tall. A single tear rolled down the reporter's cheek as he whispered to himself, "That's the headline." The next day, the world saw it, splashed across newspapers, shared across millions of screens. A story not about scandal, not about politics, but about something the world had forgotten, the quiet power of humility. The photo that went viral wasn't of the judge's robe, nor the courtroom itself. It was of two hands, one wrinkled and rough, the other clean and firm, clasped together. Father and son, pride and humility, past and future. One story, finally complete, and in homes around the world, people looked at that image and felt something stir, something soft, something sacred. A son texted his father for the first time in years. A daughter called her mother just to say thank you. And a man cleaning the streets that night looked up at the sky and smiled. Because maybe, just maybe, the world had started to see people like him. The judge resigned a year later, not out of shame, but out of peace. He opened a foundation in his father's name to support workers, janitors, cleaners, the invisible hearts who hold the world together quietly. At the opening ceremony, he stood on stage holding his father's old broom. He smiled at the crowd and said, "Some people build empires. My father built me." The audience rose again. Tears, applause, love, and somewhere in the back row, Mr. James sat quietly, watching, smiling, and whispering the same words that had carried him through a lifetime of struggle. "One day you'll be proud of me, son." And now, the son was the one saying them back. Because sometimes the real story isn't about success or power. It's about seeing, truly seeing, the people who built us. That day, the courtroom didn't just witness justice. It witnessed something far greater: love, forgiveness, and the quiet strength of humility. And as the camera faded, one final truth lingered in the air. Never look down on anyone, because you might be looking at the reason you stand tall.